Round 1 of FIDE Candidates Tournament 2026. Sindarov starts against Esipenko, and we begin with Queen's Gambit declined, 3 knights variation. Let's go through it move by move, and slow down when the critical moment arrives. This is Round 1, Game 4 of the FIDE Candidates Tournament 2026. Javokhir Sindarov has the white pieces against Andrey Esipenko, and we will track the game from the opening into the key turning points. We get pawn to d4, then pawn to d5. Sindarov plays pawn to c4, and Esipenko answers pawn to e6. We get knight to f3, then knight to f6. Knight to c3 is met by bishop to e7. For the moment, pawn from c takes on d5 is met by pawn from e takes on d5. We get bishop to f4. Then castle kingside. Pawn to e3. Sindarov reinforces pawn to d4 and keeps options for the light-squared bishop. This is the moment. Pawn to c5. Esipenko strikes the center and grabs queenside space. Bishop to d3. Sindarov repositions to keep an eye on h7 and support pawn to e4 ideas. Knight to c6. Esipenko develops with tempo on d4 and keeps pawn to c4 in the air. We get castle kingside, then pawn to c4. Bishop to c2 is met by knight to h5. For the moment, bishop to e5. Sindarov centralizes, inviting trades on good terms. Pawn to f6. Esipenko challenges the pawn to e5 bishop and prepares pawn to f5 to clamp the kingside. We get bishop to g3, then pawn to f5. So, bishop to e5 is met by bishop to e6. We get pawn to b3, then queen to a5. Sindarov plays knight to e2, and Esipenko answers pawn to b5. Knight to f4 is met by knight takes on f4. For the moment, pawn from e takes on f4 is met by queen to d8. We get rook to e1, then queen to d7. Sindarov plays rook to e3, and Esipenko answers rook from a to e8. For the moment, pawn to h4 is met by pawn to h6. Sindarov plays pawn to g3, and Esipenko answers pawn to a6. King to g2. Sindarov tucks the king away before the files open. Bishop to f7. Esipenko consolidates and eyes pawn to d5, pawn to f5 control. Queen to d2. Sindarov connects rooks and hints at rook to a6 ideas later. Bishop to b4. Esipenko hits pawn to c3 and pawn to d2. Sindarov must juggle pressure. Queen to e2. Sindarov keeps e-file control and guards the second rank. Bishop to h5, a pin and a probe. Esipenko fixes the bishop on an active diagonal. Pawn to a4. Sindarov challenges the pawn chain and pries open the a-file. So, bishop to a5. Esipenko keeps the pin and restrains a-file pressure for now. Here is the problem. Here the move is pawn from a takes on b5. A takes pawn to b5. Files open, and the pawn to a6 square becomes a real target. Now, watch this. Here the move is pawn from a takes on b5. A takes pawn to b5. Esipenko restores the chain, but gifts Sindarov a lever on a6. Bishop to d1. Sindarov unpins and clears the a-file for rook activity. This is the moment. Here the move is bishop takes on f3 with check. Bishop takes on f3 check. Esipenko chops off a key defender and drags Sindarov's queen forward. So queen takes on f3. Sindarov keeps material balance and eyes the pawn to a8, pawn to e4 diagonal. Bishop to b6. Esipenko steadies the queenside and protects key entry squares. And now, rook to a6. The rook invades with tempo, eyeing pawn to a7 and tying down Esipenko's queenside. This is the moment. Knight takes on d4. Esipenko jumps in with tempo, hitting pawn to f3 and pawn to c2, and forcing trades. Here's the problem. Queen to h5. Sindarov points at pawn to e8 and pawn to h7, keeping the king under a spotlight. Here is the problem. Rook takes on e5. Esipenko grabs the pawn to e5 bishop and hits back in the center. Rook takes on e5. Sindarov restores material and keeps the rook active on the 5th. Queen to c6. Esipenko centralizes the queen and keeps pawn to d5 protected. This is the moment. Pawn from b takes on c4. This releases the tension the wrong way and opens lines that favor Esipenko. There was a stronger intermezzo. Now, the cleaner try was pawn from d takes on c4 with check. Pawn from d takes on c4 check. The better try for Sindarov here, checking first to untangle and keep the king safer. For the moment, after pawn from d takes on c4 with check, pawn from d takes on c4 check. After this, Esipenko's counterplay is blunted, and Sindarov keeps the initiative contained. For the moment, bishop to f3. Sindarov would consolidate, keeping the king safer behind a sturdier net. For the moment, queen to f6, and the defensive setup remains much more solid than in the game. Back to the game. After pawn from b takes on c4, the queenside opens in Esipenko's favor. Here is the problem. Pawn from b takes on c4. Esipenko snaps back, fixing a passed c-pawn and exposing Sindarov's king to checks. Bishop to a4. Sindarov restrains the c-pawn and keeps pressure along the a-file. For the moment, queen to c5. Esipenko keeps coordination and eyes the e-file tactics. Queen to g6. Sindarov points straight at the king and keeps the rook on a6 menacing. Bishop to a7. Esipenko keeps the rook out of pawn to a8 and covers checks from the long diagonal. Now watch this. Rook to e8, a direct hit on the back rank to force concessions. Now watch this. Rook takes on e8. Esipenko accepts the trade, but the king will soon be under fire. And now, here the move is queen takes on e8 with check. Queen takes on e8 check. Sindarov keeps the initiative and drags the king further into the corner. This is the moment. King to h7. Esipenko steps off the back rank, but everything is hanging by a thread. Here is the problem. Here the move is queen to g6 with check. Queen to g6 check. This is the turning shot, prying open dark squares around Esipenko's king. King to g8. Esipenko sidesteps, but the coordination is cracking. And now, bishop to d7. Sindarov freezes Esipenko's queen and knight while keeping mate threats alive. Pawn to c3. Esipenko pushes the passer, but it also leaves the king with fewer defenders. Here is the problem. Here the move is queen to e8 with check. Queen to e8 check. Sindarov keeps the initiative and forces the king's hand again. King to h7. Esipenko is hanging on, but every move is a concession. And now, here the move is queen to g6 with check. Queen to g6 check. Sindarov keeps the king boxed on the dark squares. And now, king to g8. Esipenko steps back, but the pins are unavoidable. This is the moment. Rook to e6, the killer bind. The e-file is pinned, dark squares are collapsing, and conversion is at hand. That closes round 1 context for this game, and the final result now feeds into the wider event picture. Sindarov gets the full point, and Esipenko cannot save the final position. That wraps up the game and what it means for the round.